Good morning, Grant Gillard, pastor at New Horizon Presbyterian Church on the outskirts of Odessa, Missouri. We're gathering today online because it's so cold. We'd like you to stay home. We want you to stay warm. And of course, we want you to stay safe. Today is Transfiguration Sunday, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, just a thought, kind of a hangover thought from last week's Super Bowl. It had to do with Vince Lombardi, who is the namesake for what we call the Lombardi Trophy. The winning team receives the Lombardi Trophy, but every participant in the Super Bowl gets a Super Bowl ring. After the Green Bay Packers won the second Super Bowl, way back in the days before Super Bowls were articulated with Roman numerals, Vince Lombardi took his Super Bowl ring and had 3 words engraved on it. Those words were, "Run to win." He borrowed that because as a good, devout Catholic, he knew the verse that Paul wrote to the church at Corinth, and it's written in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24. And when Paul writes that, he says, "Do you not know those who run in a race? All run, but only one receives the prize. Run in such a way that you may win." And so that philosophy that Vince Lombardi had of run to win just seems to speak about the heart of the competitor that runs to win. And when we think of hearts, I think of what Jesus said in John 14, that he said, "Don't let your hearts be troubled." Later on in Luke 18, when he tells a parable about an unjust judge and a poor widow, Jesus reminds them that this is a parable, that the disciples should pray and not lose heart. And then in Proverbs 4:23, the admonition is to guard your heart. I think one of the things we saw out of Tom Brady last week was this heart to win, this heart to prepare, this heart to strive for excellence. And sometimes that is just an unbeatable combination. That's all for my Super Bowl commentary. Better luck next year. Well, my wife and I have been watching a drama series on Netflix called The Last Kingdom, set in the 800s. Not the 1800s, but 800. Very medieval England, the different kings, the different countries with different kings, and land that is protected by armies and whatnot. Well, in the last kingdom, England, which is really the country of Wessex, is trying to defend themselves against the Danes, which would be the Viking invaders that come to pillage and to steal crops and of course steal silver. There is a very interesting protagonist that is the main character, who was born a Saxon. He was captured as a slave when his father, the king, was defeated. And so here he is, the son of a Saxon king, captured by the Vikings, the Danes. He is raised a Dane, but he still has his heritage as a Saxon. He's in line to receive land, and only when you are a landowner does that define you. And so here's his story as it plays out in the series. Born a Saxon, but raised a Dane, but not really a Dane because he's still a Saxon, and he has all kinds of circumstances that need to be overcome. But the message that comes out of it is, don't let your circumstances define you. And he has some defeats, and he will not let them define him. There's just a lot of very interesting things that happen so far, but it's just a topsy-turvy drama where he's on top, then he's defeated, then he gets lost, then he's found, and we've been very much enjoying that. But don't let your past define you. It makes me think about how we define ourselves. How do we define ourselves as a church? What's our story? What's the narrative we tell? How do we define ourselves as individuals? Where were we born? How were we raised? How were we educated? Were there certain circumstances that define us? There's an old story I remember about a farmer who built a barn out of 2x4s. And the storm came along, blew it down, and of course he would not let that define him, so he built a barn with bigger structures out of 2x6s instead of 2x4s. Another storm came along, blew that down, and so he built a barn out of brick. And of course that brick stood. It's kind of like the story of the 3 little pigs, a little bit, where they would not let their circumstances define them, And, of course, they defeated the wolf. So just a very interesting drama about being free from our circumstances. And nobody should say to us, you can't do this because you are fill in the blank. We need to be free from those circumstances. We'll come back to this in a little bit. Well, this is the Transfiguration Sunday, Sunday before Ash Wednesday, the Sunday that kicks off the season of Lent in the middle of this week, and we're 6 weeks away from Easter. The passage that we read from Mark chapter 9 begins very interestingly. It starts out by saying, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them to a high mountain where they were all alone. It just begins by saying, after 6 days. Okay. What happened in those 6 days prior to this? We don't know. All we know is in chapter 9, verse 1, which is kind of an odd place to leave off a major paragraph, that scenario ends. And then we're left hanging. 6 days go by, and nobody records anything Jesus says or does or teaches. And now we move on to climbing the mountain. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them to a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them, and there they appeared before Elijah, Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And in verse 6, parenthetically, Mark clues us in by reminding us that Peter did not know what to say because they were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, This is my son whom I love. Listen to him. Suddenly they were looking around. They no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had been risen from the dead. That's Mark 9, verses 2 through 9. Well, they go up on this mountain called Mount Hermon, and there Jesus was transformed. And that word transfigured, that transformation, isn't just a change of appearance. He was materialistically changed. There was a brightness about him, an illumination about him. Very mysterious, and they didn't know what to think about it. Jesus goes up on Mount Hermon, and there we see Moses, who also had an encounter with God on Mount Sinai. And then there's Elijah, who also had an encounter with God on a mountaintop, Mount Horeb. And we got Moses representing the law, we got Elijah representing the prophets, and now we have Jesus with the confirmation of God saying, This is my son in whom I'm well pleased, listen to him. And now Jesus fulfills and then supersedes all the expectations of the Old Testament law and the Old Testament prophets. And of course this transfiguration, this metamorphosis, this just this incredible transformation reminds us of what Jesus' mission is and the glory of God that shines through him. Interestingly, this word is also used in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Now, instead of transfigured, it's the same Greek word, but they change it to transformed. And what Paul wrote there to the Romans is, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. But that idea of your mind being changed, of being illuminated, of being transformed, not just to change its perspective, but to change its whole outlook. Well, I know, if weather permitting, the former parish I just left in Jackson, Missouri, today we'll be singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Every Transfiguration Sunday, we used to sing that song. I presume that tradition is carrying on, even though I'm no longer there. Battle Hymn of the Republic, we think it originated out of the Civil War, but actually it was published in 1807 in a Methodist hymnal. They called it a folk hymn because they took some sacred lyrics about revivalism and brought them to a secular tune, and now it becomes a folk hymn. In the pre-Civil War, talked about John Brown's his raids on the Confederate outposts and the abolitionism of freeing humanity. Martin Luther King quoted the Battle Hymn of the Republic after they marched from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And the Battle Hymn of the Republic was even sung at Barack Obama's second inauguration. But you won't find it in most of our hymnals because as Presbyterians we shun this overt militarism. It's just not politically correct anymore, although the lyrics, the theology is absolutely rock solid, but it's this idea of becoming a militaristic, particularly northern Civil War hymn, although those in the South sang it as well. There is a verse that goes, "In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, with the glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. His truth is marching on." And despite the militarism, despite the sexist language here that he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, it's this idea that Christ transfigures us, Christ changes us, Christ frees us. And I go back to The Last Kingdom on Netflix. Here's our character who is living in both worlds of the Saxon world as well as the Viking world, but even though he lives in both worlds, he is not a part of both worlds because the Vikings see him as a Saxon, the Saxons see him as a Viking, and he is lost and he has no land. He wants to work his way back with the mercy of the kings that he works with. If he can just get his land back. And of course his land is being held now by a corrupt uncle who, instead of when the protagonist's father died, the son was supposed to be king, the brother took over. And likewise is happening too in this country of Wessex, where the king died and now King Alfred, the brother, took over despite having a son. It's a very complicated feudal system of these kingdoms and armies and kings. Great history, but we've now added drama thanks to Netflix. But here's this poor protagonist who is being defined by his circumstances, the upbringing, very frustrated in that because he cannot claim what is rightfully his, that is being king of this land that went through his family. But in this vision, this is what I get out of Transfiguration Sunday, is that Christ was changed. Not just changed in appearance, but really transformed. And that's why I like Romans 12 too, that our minds are transformed. It's like they can be illuminated. They can be enlightened. And when we're talking with people, when we're trying to relate to people, particularly those we don't get along with or those who may have a differing opinion, sometimes our minds just need to be enlightened and perhaps to see things from their perspective or enlightened with the discretion of when we should just absolutely keep our mouths shut. I read a very interesting post in another app called Discern, and it was about Christians should pray. It has to do with their relationships on social media. Christians should pray before they post. And maybe if we thought the consequences of what we are stating as our opinion, what kind of a reaction are we looking for? Is it one that divides or one that unites? And that was kind of a transfiguring moment for me too, is that somebody posts something and immediately we type a response, push send, and fire back. And then sometimes people get upset with that because sometimes we said stuff without thinking. If we would just pray before we post. And I've also been kind of intrigued by one person's opinion of what is an opinion. An opinion is just our thoughts, but an opinion comes with an agenda. I'm going to share with you my opinion, hoping you will change your mind. That's not very enlightening, not very transfiguring, because you are probably going to render an opinion, hoping I'll change my mind. And have we come together? Nope, it just seems to divide us. So this idea of transfiguration, and when you put that now in a theological context, when we die, our bodies will be transfigured. And this is what Paul writes. He's writing to the church at Corinth again, And this comes out of chapter 15 when he says, I declare to you, brothers and sisters, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Listen, let me tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will be changed. That is, we will be transfigured in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. The trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For the perishable, that is, this human body, must clothe itself with the imperishable, our heavenly body. The mortal, our human bodies, must be clothed with immortality, our heavenly body. When the perishable has been clothed with the imperishable and the mortal with immortality, then the saying is written that will come to true. Death has been swallowed up by victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? For the sting of death is sin. The power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, he gives us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. And then he says, therefore, dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. And we preach that at funerals, that what we see is we're looking into this mirror dimly. And Paul says what we are looking at has not yet been revealed. That is, this decaying, aging body will put on something that is just absolutely marvelously new. We will be changed, totally transformed, totally transfigured. But likewise, in the same life, I still think that there's a way that our thoughts, our relationships can be transfigured. It's the same power that sets us free from defeat and despair. We look at somebody and sometimes they're hard to get along with. But that power of Christ, the grace that Christ has given us, now spills over into their lives. The love, the unconditional love that Christ bestows upon us, now becomes the love that we share with one another. We're free. We are free from the sin that binds us and imprisons us. And of course, even the chaos that seeks to rob us of peace. The Battle Hymn of the Republic, of course, was written, and the lyrics were updated by a poet who was an abolitionist. And to be an abolitionist means to set people free. And what has Christ done for us on the cross? He sets us free from the impact of that sin, the penalty of that sin, and also, I think, from the freedom to not be our human selves, but instead treat others as brothers and sisters. And in that last kingdom, here's our protagonist. His name is Uhtred. And Uhtred is troubled because he cannot find that rest that defines him. And he will not be defined by his circumstances, because his quest to find his way home is what defines him. Not the unfortunate circumstances, not the battles, not the kings that betray him, not the priests who betray him, but his destiny is defined by his hope of getting home. That's the last kingdom. It's 4 seasons long. I'm only on season 2. Somewhere's going to have a happy ending, I guess. But that's the idea of transfiguration. We are changed. Changed in this life as we experience it today, or like I like to use the word existentialism. We are exchanged. We are transformed and transfigured and changed in what we exist and what we experience and how we perceive it. We're also changed in the next life. So until next time, remember, we walk by faith and not by sight. And let that peace that Christ promises fill you with strength, and may your faith be as well for this road that we face. God bless. We'll see you next week, I hope.